we all lie. We all do it, whether we like to or not. We embellish things, we exaggerate things. The truth of the matter is, the only person who knows for definite when you're lying is you.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest is ranked number 9 in the world for body language. He is a former covert intelligence operator and a best-selling author and founder of SpyQ, an elite spy school experience built by operatives for leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, without speaking any further, because I want this gentleman to do all the talking, please welcome Gavin Stone. Gavin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, Gina, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Oh my God, I had to have you on when I started reading your bio and about you. I'm really intrigued. And I will say, we're going to get into it a little bit, but I had something happen to me last week and I was like, this is a Gavin question. I'm so excited. But before we get into that one, I want to start with how you ended up in intelligence. Like, was it a lifelong goal or was it like this unexpected turn?
I slipped. So it was purely accidental. It started years and years ago, and it was very different for me to the usual route that most people are taking. So for most people, they're at college and they usually get a tap on the shoulder off the security services or somebody to say, look, would you consider working for your country, kind of thing. And I did it a slightly different way. So I started off in the private sector, in private investigations and the bread and butter end of things, and managed to work my way up through different government departments and different people, and rub shoulders with the right people, using what I'd learned along the way to make contacts in where I wanted to end up. And every time I kind of went up a step, as it were, I met somebody else that allowed me to get another step further, and just kind of did what I needed to do in order to keep rising to human intelligence gathering.
Wow. Wish I had you when I was just starting out in my 20s in the film business, and I needed to, it's all about making those connections and moving up.
Yeah.
And so, okay, knowing that you are a body language expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you got into intelligence and all that stuff. Like, were you a good liar and a good reader for people at when you were younger, or was it a skill that you ended up acquiring through training, or was it a mix of both?
A mix of both, really. I mean, I've always been reasonably good at reading people anyway, which has been a massive help. But then it was the lessons and training in the world of intelligence and that kind of thing that then ended up with me taking the route of becoming apparently one of the world's best. So, this isn't my claim, by the way. This is it was Global Gurus who ranked me at number 9 in the world. So this isn't something I woke up one day and thought, look at me, I'm so good. I'm going to give myself a title. Working in the world of intelligence, you do get a lot of training. A lot of it is actually done through role play, but obviously out in the field, you see in real time, you learn what sticks out and what stands out, and then kind of your skill set, as it were, kind of improves from there.
Okay, so I remember when I did Civilian Seer, and it was this weekend course, and there was this little piece of it where they did lying, and they were like, because you are gonna be interrogated and you have to be able to breathe and be calm under this high pressure situation. I know me. Calm is not a word to describe me in any way, shape, or form. And when I am under immense pressure, put it this way, I was an actress for a while, and I was in an acting class, and we had to do this improv scene where I was in jail, and I had to convince the guy that was my scene partner. He planted drugs on me, and I ended up it was his drugs. He put them in my bag, and he didn't know that I was taking that purse that day. And I took that purse that day, ended up in jail. And then I am, telling him, he came to visit, and I'm like, you have to tell them I can't go back in there. You have to tell them this is your drugs, all this stuff. And all of a sudden, it's just an acting class. It's a scene, right? Mm-hmm. I am bawling my eyes out, picturing myself going back to this jail and this prison. And none of it is real, right? Mm-hmm. But I feel like I am about to go back to jail. And I'm just hysterical. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not even real, right? Can you imagine like myself in this situation where like I'm in like North Korea or Russia or like even American, but I don't want to be in any prison. I don't want to be near a prison, right? Like I'd be freaking out. What are some tips that you teach people in order to stay calm and be able to, just now, especially if I'm like, it doesn't matter if I'm telling the truth or not. I am just going to be freaking out. And I don't know as a body language expert if you're able to say like, like, oh, they're lying because they're just like high strung. Like, what do you have to people in terms of just being calm and, in a situation like that? And what is the body language that you read for someone that could be telling the truth, but is just frantic?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So what I'll do, I'll start with saying that, and I have been in situations where I've been in a cell or a holding cell or in a situation where I could be looking at a very dismal future, and I've had to kind of lay back and relax and kind of say, okay, what do I do? How do I get out of this? What happens is, with the training we've got, you become, and I know you said you did see us, so you know a little bit about kind of the fundamentals of escape and evasion and that kind of thing. So if you have a confidence in your abilities and a confidence in your training, that in itself gives you a massive confidence in your abilities, especially if you've had to do it before, even if it's only been in training or role play or that kind of thing. If it's done that many times, you develop that kind of muscle memory. If you know and you have that calm confidence of, well, okay, I'm going to get out of this one way or another. I'm not staying here. I have the ability to get out of this building, prison, whatever that it is. Whether it's a compound, whether it's an actual government prison, whatever. I have the abilities to be able to get out of it in my own time when I've worked out how I'm going to do it. That is not a problem. So long term, I know I'm going to get home. So that gives you a bit of a and especially, like I say, if you've actually had to do it before, that in itself gives you a massive confidence. You think it's a situation I've got out of previously. I've done it before. I'll do it again. That's more of your kind of giving you the calm in the situation. However, you have to get out of your kind of first mode of thinking, because your first mode of thinking is very short term. Panic. I'm in trouble. I'm going to get locked away, and you go into that kind of fight or flight mode, as it were. So you have to rely on what's commonly known as system 2 thinking. And this is where you have to start thinking long term and saying, okay, is this something that is going to actually affect me for the rest of my life, or am I going to get home at some point in the not too distant future? And as soon as you realize, okay, I'm not going to be locked away in a hellhole forever, there will be a way I will get out of this. That again will give you time to rationalize what's going on around you.
When you are doing the interrogating, right, what are the first things that you look for to tell if someone's lying or not?
Deviation from baseline. So I'm looking for anything that's not normal. Now, it might not necessarily be that they're lying, but it will mean that something's different. And that's when I have to ask, well, why is it different? If I ask you a question, did you do A? And you go, yes. And did you do B? Yes. Did you do C? Yes, sir. Did you do D? Yes. Did you do? And you go, okay, why was that one different? Why was there a completely different tone? Why was there a different, language? Why was everything different? Why was the body language different on that when that answer was given? So, like I say, it might not necessarily mean deception, but it does mean that something was going on in the mind of that person at that particular time. And then you can go back and you can probe a little bit and say, let's just go back and reflect on this one for a moment and just tell me a bit more about what happened there. And that allows you then to dig a little bit further and get closer to the truth.
Did you ever read the book, The Art of Deception, or the book?
I'm aware of it, yeah. I think I've read some of it. So.
Read it like 3 times, and I'm like, I'm intrigued by it because I'm like, oh, and I catch myself sometimes because they said something about like people lie in threes. They said, they might say like, oh, 3 times that happened, or, and I notice with myself, like I've become more aware, and like I'll say something and like I'll say 3 and I'm like, it's actually 2 times. I don't know why I rounded up to 3, but it's just like little things that you don't realize. And apparently when I was doing the seer thing, I had to tell a story and they had to vote on if it was a lie or not. And while I was telling the story, they would put checks like a mark. They put a mark on one side of the board and a mark on the other side of the board. And apparently when you tell a story, if you're telling it in the present tense, I didn't know what the mark was for until afterwards, but it was for when I said something in the past tense and when I said things in the present tense. And they said where if you tell a story in the present tense, they said that's more likely to be true because you're living through it versus if you go to the past where you aren't living through it. Is there some truth to that?
There can be, but what's more important is tense changes. So listen out for if somebody is talking about something that happened to them when they were, say, 10 years old, and they start off and they say, I was doing this, then I was doing that, then I was doing the other. Now I'm going down the road and I see this and I see that. And then they go back to past tense again. And after that, and listen to at which point the tense changes. So if it's at the point of the incident and then they go back to past tense afterwards, that's when it'd be more of a red flag for me, and I'd be more concerned listening to those changes in tenses during the duration of the story.
You have to be a fantastic listener for this. Like, you really have to be like not just listening with your ears, but like with your eyes too, right? To really get what they're saying. And does this make one a really good communicator? Like, are you a fantastic communicator?
I'd like to think so. I suppose it depends on the situation. I mean, it's kind of 4 a.m. when I'm getting a Dunkin' Donuts to keep myself going because I've been driving on the road all night. No, I'm kind of, I'm grunting at people because all I want to do is get a black coffee and get back on the road. Other times, if I'm giving a lesson on what to look for in deception detection, then, completely different altogether. And I'll be teaching everything from statement analysis to blink rate, which, I mean, blink rate for me is one of the biggest tells for spotting deception.
So what is that?
So this is, you're literally looking at how fast and how often somebody's blinking. If somebody is reading a book or watching a movie or really concentrating heavily on their laptop, etc., their blink rate will go right down to kind of, 2 or 3 per minute, perhaps, maybe even sometimes even less. So they'll very seldom blink. When somebody's under stress, they actually blink more frequently and a lot faster. So if you're talking to somebody, and you say to them, "Did you eat my cookies?" and all of a sudden they start blinking like crazy and go, "No, I didn't," and then they carry on talking, then it stands a chance they ate your cookies because their stress rate has gone up, and that's why the blink rate matches.
So can anyone learn to spot deception, or is it something that is it like you have to be wired? Is it like a thing anyone could really learn or pick up at any age?
It can be learned quite easily if you take the time to learn all the areas and all the disciplines of it. And then you have to take on top of that you will always get what you look for. So if you look for deception, you'll find it. So you have to sometimes step back a little bit. And this is where I talk about something called clusters. People have got this misconception that if somebody folds their arms, they're being defensive. If they fold their arms, it could mean anything at all. It could mean they're cold. It could mean they're comfortable folding their arms. It could mean they've had a thought about something that made them uncomfortable. There's so many different things that it could mean. If you look at somebody and you say to you're asking them about a particular day out and whatever else, and you think there's a point that they did something they shouldn't have done, perhaps use your credit card to pay for the drinks when you didn't know about it, and you bring that up, then all of a sudden they fold their arms. But at the same time, their blink rate increases, their breath location changes from belly to chest, their legs cross, and and they start being evasive with answers, or even attacking with their answers. That's when you can say, okay, now I've got a cluster of things going on, and this is showing me deception. And then you throw on top of that this will also all change depending on the state. So if I said to you, well, Gina, did you go to the moon last night? You could say, no, I didn't go to the moon, and there'd be no deception signals there at all. Or you could say, yes, I did go to the moon, and again, there'd be no deception signals there at all. And the reason being, you've got nothing to lose. It doesn't really matter what your answer is. Whereas if you were on death row and you were you were being interviewed by somebody that is going to ultimately kind of decide that your fate, all of a sudden the stakes are huge. And now deception detection is going to be easier because of the fact that the stress signals are going to be there and they're going to be easier to spot.
It's funny that you mentioned the arm crossing because we had former KGB Jack Barsky on the show.
Oh, yeah, no, Jack, I'm talking to him later.
He's fantastic guy. Oh my God. And he mentioned that. He mentioned like that everyone thinks that, folding your arms, he goes, they could just be hugging themselves. That could be their form of comfort. You don't know. You need to know their baseline.
Exactly.
And unless you know their baseline, like you don't know. And it's just interesting that you say that because I remember Coach Mack was the Navy SEAL that trained me and kind of started this entire journey for me. And we used to do these brain chemistry classes once a week. And he would talk about lying. And he was like, we all do it. He's like, every single one of us lie. And it's sometimes we don't even realize it's just this exaggeration. Like I mentioned earlier when I said 3, and I'm like, it was really 2. In my mind, I'm like, it was really 2, right? And especially in the summertime, we do it all the time. We're like, it's like 300 degrees out, or like or we could even say like it's 110 and it's really 100.
Yeah.
We don't. It's still 100 and 110. They're still hot.
Oh, yeah.
But why we need to exaggerate that is beyond me. But I I feel like we all do it without realizing it. It's when we realize it is when we can slip up, right? It's like in those moments of how do I like stress, like, oh, here, this is a good segue into where it was my Gavin question. So I was away and I chose to lie. And I knew that this was premeditated. I was like, I'm choosing to lie in this situation. And we talked about this prior, like the group I was with, like, Gina, you're the one that's going to say it and you're going to say it this way. I said, got it. Okay. Situation occurs and I kind of go rogue. And I just like, then, because what happened is I was caught off guard. It wasn't what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be, I was supposed to initiate, right? And then all of a sudden I got surprised with somebody initiating, and I'm like, and I then went with whatever I had in my mind. Now, it still was fine. It still worked out where it went in my favor. However, because I didn't go with the plan, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be over the next 2 days. Okay. And I put us in a very stressful situation where they could have found out that this was a lie if I didn't follow, because I went rogue, right? And I'm just really upset with myself. I'm like, we practiced this and I still went rogue anyway. Now, it didn't matter either way, but I was stressing out the entire time. What do you have for somebody that is lying and is just in this stressful situation and not like, how do you, because you have to lie for a living in a way. You're an operator. You lie, right? You have to deceive.
Yeah.
What happens when you kind of go off script, when something goes not according to plan and you have to kind of, what do you do in a situation like that?
The first thing to do, obviously, is just give yourself a mental reset for a moment. I did something that it was a real rookie mistake, only going back a few years. Where, if you can imagine, if I'm operating and I'm trying to think how much I can reveal of this and how much I need to keep quiet. So I might mention countries that might not necessarily be the countries in question. If you can understand that, sometimes I have to operate using cover and have to cover my tracks as to where I've been, where I've come from, etc. In order to keep cover, I had to drive from the UK, get a ferry crossing into Europe, drive to Germany, and it was in Germany where I got my flight to the destination country. I got to the destination country and I'm at passport control, and they said, where have you come from? And by default I went, England. And I went, oh, no, I haven't. I've come from Germany. And it was panic station. I was like, oh, stupid. Rookie mistake, because it was a red-eye flight and I wasn't with it. I was tired, and even though I'd practiced everything else for the cover, it was something that by default I just responded England. So straight away I thought, right, okay, step back. And just give yourself a breather. And what I did, I said, sorry. I said, I haven't come from England. I said, I've come from Germany. I said, I'm so tired. I said, I went to England last week. I said, to visit family. I said, and I had a little bit of a family issue. I said, it's just thrown me out. I'm not completely with it at the moment. I apologise. Early hours of the morning. And he just went, okay, stamp my passport and give it me back. It's just about kind of remaining calm, not letting your system one thinking kind of run into panic stations, and taking a step back and saying, okay, just before you open your mouth, take a moment to think, and it shouldn't take you too long to what would be acceptable, what would be normal in these circumstances. Everybody has done it at some point. Even if they're telling the truth, people have answered with a completely different answer to what they know is actually right. You might turn around and say, where have you been? And you go, oh, I've just been to Target. And then you go, I haven't been to Target. I was at Walmart. Why did I say Target? Sometimes it's just one of those things that, especially if it's an answer you're used to giving, so you answer by default or out of habit, and it's not necessarily that you went out to deceive anybody. It's just that the mouth reacted before the brain was fully engaged.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that one. How does one practice something like this? How does one, because it's funny because I find myself sometimes in these situations and I'm like, oh, I want to reset. Like I want to do it again. But then again, I don't want to put myself in that situation. I don't even want to be in the situation in the first place. But because I did find myself in that situation and it epically failed, I want to have a success, right? But how does one practice things like this in a, I guess, like safe environment where you mentioned training, right? You mentioned like you hope that your training is good enough. Do you know you have to default to your training? Well, most people on this show are civilians, right? That are listening to the show. We're all civilians. And we want to just have stronger mindsets, become stronger in skill sets and things like this. So how does one like practice something like this, like with themselves or
Well, I mean,
family, friends?
it's so when I did my training for deception as well as deception detection, we had this scenario where I sat down and I had to take part in a 4-hour conversation. There was a camera on a tripod recording the entire thing, and as you said, we all lie. We all do it, whether we like to or not. We embellish things, we exaggerate things. Sometimes it's just easier to cut corners rather than giving somebody a full explanation. Sometimes the full explanation is embarrassing. You don't want to let people know, so you say, "Oh, it was just this that happened," or whatever. So, but the truth of the matter is, the only person who knows for definite when you're lying is you. So what they did is they recorded the entire conversation and they said, "Right, there you go. Now go back and watch it and learn your tells, because you know when you were lying." And you're the only one who knows exactly when you were lying. So look for what your tells are while you were lying. Look at your verbal tells, look at your physical tells, look at absolutely everything. Whether it was tone change, pitch, cadence, whether you looked away, whatever it is that you did, learn them. And then when you've learned them and you know them, instead of trying to fight them, you can be aware of them when you are being deceptive, but also pepper them in when you're being truthful. And that will then completely disrupt the baseline. We were talking about baseline. If people are trying to get a baseline on you, then they can't if you've disrupted it by peppering in deception flags, as it were, at points of truth, and they are still mildly present when you're also being deceptive. Nobody will be able to tell. So if you want to become an experienced liar, there's 2 methods. 1, become a politician, or 2, get yourself a camcorder and stick it on a tripod and record yourself talking to a family member.
So how long did it take you to to decode yourself, like to really, like, do you go through it a couple of times and did
Yeah.
you redo the tape and redo another story and stuff like that, or did you stick to the same story? Or
No, it was just a case of rewatching it back with a notepad and pen and writing down at what minutes what was going on. When I knew that I'd embellished or exaggerated or covered something up or glossed over something, I would then say, right, it happened at 16 minutes and 32 seconds. Right, back it up. What was I doing? What did I do? What was the And I went through everything. The transcript, so I could say, right, what was I saying? How fast was I saying it? Was there any pitch change? What was going on? What was going on with my body language? Absolutely everything. And then when I'd made a list of frequent tells that I knew that when I was being deceptive, I knew what they were, I could then consciously go out and kind of make a point of either putting them in my conversation. And this is where you develop muscle memory, or being more aware of, if I knew I was deliberately being deceptive, watering them down and being a bit more, because you'll never stop them. Body language is one of those things that is innate. You can't control it. It's as simple as that. It's a bit like a physiological reaction. So if you can imagine, if somebody says to you, "Oh, control your body language," that's a bit like saying to somebody, right, somebody's going to jump out and startle you at 4 a.m. You've got to control yourself and not let yourself jump. You can't be done. If you're startled, if you watch somebody when they're startled, they kind of pull that weird funny face and curl themselves up and pull their shoulders up, and you can't stop it. You can't control it. So the only thing you can do is try and regulate it as best you can in your reaction to it, and then like with anything else, is start sprinkling it in other places.
So why would you want to deliberately sprinkle it in?
That will completely disrupt the baseline. So if you do have somebody
Okay.
who's trying to get a baseline on you, say, "Oh, I've noticed he scratches the back of his head every time we ask him about this particular thing." Well, if you scratch the back of your head when you're being truthful as well as when you're being deceptive,
Gotcha.
you've got the whole baseline of kind of nothing stands out as abnormal.
Are you really good at poker?
I'm not allowed in Vegas anymore, I don't think. I'm barred from the whole of Vegas. But no, nobody wants to play with me anymore when it comes to poker. I don't know why.
I'd be so intrigued because I want you to, I mean, be so much better. You could tell me my tells instead of sitting there for 4 hours watching myself. I'm like, you could just play with me and tell me what my tells are. I'm curious. I, I don't know how to play poker, but if I did, that I'm just intrigued by the fact that you can, really, apparently you could really tell a lot about somebody by watching them, observing them, and talking to them. And I find that very, very fascinating. And it's funny too because Randy Weitenheimer has been on the show a couple of times, and we work together. And he will have me say something, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would have me say something that's true for me to listen to he goes, "You hear your voice change?"
Mm-hmm.
He goes, to get me to understand like the tone and the way you don't realize it unless you're really hearing yourself, the pitch change within
Yeah.
yourself. Which then when you can do it to yourself, you can pick it up on other people.
Mm-hmm. And it is
And
very subtle, but it is something that,
yeah.
and with the right amount of practice, you can pick it up. And I mean, one of my favorite areas, believe it or not, for deception detection, which I find a lot more reliable, is actually statement analysis. And I was taught by the actual creator of statement analysis, and this is something that, if you look at what's being said rather than just the body language and the way it's being said, sometimes you come to the conclusion that you've been given an answer, but not the answer. So one of the ones I use frequently, for example, is if you say to your roommate, "Hey, have you taken my wallet?" And they go, "I don't even know where you keep your wallet." That's not a no. It's not a denial. It's not answering your question. What it is, it's a pacification. It's an answer that most people would accept as kind of, okay, he doesn't know where I keep my wallet. They work out for themselves then, okay, so if he doesn't know where to keep it, he obviously hasn't stolen it. And they've come to their own conclusion rather than actually being given an answer of, "No, I haven't taken your wallet," or "Yes, it's here." Listening very, very carefully to the answer can definitely give you an indication as to whether somebody's been truthful or not.
Curious about this one. As we talked about, we all lie, we all exaggerate, we all, don't even realize half the time. How do you navigate relationships or friendships when you could always tell, like, if someone's not being honest or not?
For me personally, and I have kind of learned this the hard way, you find if you call people out on it, they just dig in deeper. They just become, you get like the stubborn mule effect. It doesn't do you any favors at all, whether it's relationship wise, whether it's friendship wise, or anything else. If you're aware of the fact that somebody's been untruthful, 9 times out of 10, the best thing to do is dismiss it. Understand that they've got a reason, even if you don't know what that reason is. Even if you don't know what that reason's good, just understand they have a reason. And let them, because at the end of the day, there's only two reasons why people lie. Two primary reasons, and that's protection or gain. And whether that's a monetary gain, whether it's to gain status, whether it's to gain social acceptance, or whatever the case may be, that's gain covered one way or another. And the same with protection, whether it's to protect yourself, whether it's to protect yourself from embarrassment or physical incarceration, or whether it's to protect others, one way or another, those are the only two areas that the two primary reasons that people lie. There are lots of subcategories, but that's it. It's as simple as that. And as soon as you understand that, they're either protecting themselves or they think they've got something to gain by by this deception, then all of a sudden it doesn't seem in any way harmful. You see it for what it is. It's kind of a defense, as it were.
Sometimes I find it really funny, especially with kids, like,
Mhm.
because they're great at it, and they're like really good because like it's like they believe it themselves when they're
Yeah.
saying it to you. Like my nephew's 3, and he, like you mentioned, gain, and we're anytime we're walking, he'll just stop, and I'm like, "What's wrong? Let's go." And he's like, "I can't," and I'm like, "Why? What's the problem?" And he goes, and it's the same knee every time. That's the best part. He's 3, and, like, he'll, like, hold his knee and, like, kinda, like, go down with his knee and, like, "My knee hurts, hold me," and it's like, he just wants something gained, he just wants to be held, right?
Mhm.
And, of course, I'm a sucker, I'm like, "Of course," because I just know that, like, I'm not gonna be able to hold him much longer, and I want that, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's so cute. But it's funny, though, because the first time he did it, I pick him up, right?
Mhm.
And then I go home and I tell his dad, my brother, and I'm like, "Yeah, his knee was hurting." And I picked him up. And my brother goes, "Yeah, he does it all the time. I don't even know if it's real." At first, I don't, now he does it so much. I don't think he has a knee problem, but
Mhm.
you don't know with a 3-year-old because he's 3, right? I don't
Exactly.
know if he's actually hurting or not. But then I picked it up pretty quickly that like his knee's fine, he just wants that, but it's just so cute. I just can't. It's hilarious to me.
That's the problem. When it's children and it's so cute, you can't help yourself. And oh, come on, come here. I got you. I'll carry you. So humans are really, really quick. We learn from such a young age what works for us. And when we find something works for us, that's when we will capitalize on it, and that's why it's the same knee every time. That's why it's the same sudden stop. It's the same set because it's worked before, So if it's worked before, chances are it's going to work again. Reasoning of them in the mind of a 3-year-old is kind of, that's what worked last time, so I'm going to give that another shot. And of course, once they get into the habit and routine of it, then it becomes like the kind of, I want to be carried. What do I do? Let's do the knee thing again. Even if it's a subconscious thought, the way to get around it, if you get to the point where it's too much, or you've been carrying a toddler for that long, your arms ache and you physically can't do it anymore, is to look at their leverage points. It's kind of I was at my uncle's house going back a few years. He's got all his his family around the dining table, and the one particular kid always only eats the fries, nothing else, never touches the vegetables, and they can't get him to eat the vegetables or anything. They've tried everything, and he's like, no, I'd rather eat glass, kind of thing, broken glass. I basically they'd kept this going for so long. I called him over, give him 5 minutes, and then a few moments later, everybody's watching in amazement while my cousin's sitting at the table, wolfing all these vegetables down. And I'm like, how the hell did you get him to do that? And they said, we've told him it's good for him. We've told him this. We've told him. I said, no. I said, you're arguing with logic. He's 4, 5. Logic isn't going to work. Look, kids don't care about logic at 5. They don't care about the vitamins and that's neither here nor there. What you need to do is appeal to his world, and his world is he's going to be able to beat his bigger brother. When I said that the bigger brother that beats him in everything, the reason he beats him in everything is because he eats his vegetables. That's why he's better at it and stronger at it than you, and you don't eat your vegetables. That's why you can't do it. And of course, all of a sudden he's like, right, that's my brother's secret. Now, all of a sudden, the vegetables have a whole new appeal. So, of course, what that's done has changed the dynamic. And this is how it works with 3-year-olds. You've got to look at the leverage points for them. We are, as adults, we look at things in a very logical kind of mindset. Why do I do this? Why should I get that? We whereas children, that's it's a totally different thing. You've got to look at the area that is going to make them go, yeah, I want to walk. I don't want to do the bad knee thing. I want to, and if you can find the right leverage points, the bad knee will soon go away. Even if it's a reward, kind of. I tell you what, if you beat me to the ice cream parlor, I'll buy you, whatever you want. And of
Yeah.
course, you watch that bad knee vanish.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned logic because so what also got me to end up in this Navy SEAL prep program was
Mhm.
the very first day of train. It was just, for me, it was just supposed to be one day.
Mm.
Like, how strong is my mindset? Could I not quit throughout the day? And then this is what was like, for me, like the test, because I was already going to that civilian seer thing. Okay, I'll be good.
Mhm.
Well, the very, very last thing that Coach Max said was, if you think day one is hard, try day two, because your mind is going to give you every logical excuse to not come back. And every single excuse is going to be, like I said, logical, right? So you're going to respond to the logic because we're adults, right? And we're like, that's your reasoning to not come back, right? And if you want to have a strong mindset, you got to beat out that logic. And oh my gosh, was he right? Like day two showed up. My body was like in so much pain from day one. Did not week one, week two is coming up. And I was like, I can't go back. Like my body, because our brain moves us away from pain, right? And that was so painful. It wants us to be safe. So all these excuses. You're not trained to be a Navy SEAL. You already did day one. You never was going to go back to day two. You're not, don't worry. You're still a person of your word. Like all these things. And I had to beat that out to show up for day two. And I had to keep going and going and going. But, I find myself fighting that. I didn't realize until I started understanding logic on how much of a logical person I am and how much of a logical person we are. And also until I started observing myself, I didn't realize how much a creature of habit I am. Like when you don't realize when I go to the gym, I don't realize I'm parking in the same spot every single day. Like I had no idea. Or when I go to the bathroom in the gym, it's the same stall every single time. Or, and I notice for myself when I go somewhere, like it's the same stall no matter what bathroom. And I'm like, Gina, change it up. But it's just comfortable, this one, right? For some reason. Yeah. So how do you find yourself understanding logic and then fighting that to, level up to be, on that next level of human?
Understand that the reason this happens is quite simply down to safety. It's a survival mechanism. You go to that bathroom stall because last time you went to that bathroom stall, it was safe. You survived it. You lived. You didn't. No grizzly bears jumped out at you. Nobody attacked you. Nothing blew up. There was toilet paper. It flushed. So why would you risk going to another one that might not flush, that might not have toilet paper, that might have a grizzly bear hiding behind the door or whatever the case may be? And as crazy as it sounds, I mean, obviously we know not very many toilets hopefully have grizzly bears behind the door, but the way the human brain works, was way before we had these kind of the lifestyle we got now, where if we were living in the wild, we had to be very aware of our surroundings, and therefore we would go to places that were familiar, that we recognized, that we'd used before, things we'd done before. And this is why we tend to run on scripts, as it were. We'll always do the same thing. It's a level of, see, people go on and say, no, I've got OCD, or what. We all have OCD. Everybody has OCD. We just have different levels of it. Because when it comes to making a coffee, you could ask 100 different people the correct way to do it and probably get 100 different answers. You put the milk in first. No, you don't. You put the water in first. No, sugar always goes in first. Everybody's got their own method of how they do things, and they will do it the exact same way every single time, purely because it's what's worked for them previously. With that in mind, growth obviously comes from stepping outside of your comfort zone, and that's when you did the right thing by spotting it and saying, okay, let's change things up. Because a lot of us are running on autopilot a lot of the time, purely because of the fact that we know this works, we've done it before, we know the routine, let's go ahead and do it again. And it's to help prevent decision fatigue. Why should you waste 20 minutes driving around the parking lot saying, right, where am I going to park today? You just park where you parked last time. Why do you go into the gym and say, which machine am I going to work? You just start where you started last time and finish where you finished last time. Which locker, which store, which you use the one. And sometimes this is disrupted because you go to your usual locker and somebody's used it. And then you'll find yourself going, and you look around, there's open lockers and locked lockers, but you'll spend like an extra 3 or 4 minutes thinking, well, which one I'm going to use now? Because the one I use is gone. And so, it becomes like a whole thing. It's like, that's an inconvenience. And that's when you'll start saying, well, do I go up here? Or, is that right? Maybe down there? No, my stuff might get splashed. Okay. And it turns into a whole episode because your usual pattern has been disrupted. So the best thing to do is realize what it is, why it's there, the purpose it serves, and then kind of say, okay, but I don't need to use the same stall or the same locker every time I park in the same spot. I can park where the hell I want. and mix things up, because when the brain learns that you can park in spot 1 or spot 5 or spot 7 or spot 3 or spot 2 or spot 4, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to survive. It opens up a lot more options to you.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee.
I'm curious about this one. Have there ever been moments where like you wished you couldn't read people so well?
There have been a couple, yeah. And so I do get this thing a lot where people say, oh, well, you're reading me right now. And I'm like, no. I try to explain to people, it's a bit like walking past a newspaper stand in the middle of the city with all these different newspapers on display. And just because you have the ability to read every single headline and every single word of every single article doesn't mean that you want to. Can you imagine if you read absolutely everything that you ever saw just because it was there in front of you? You would drive yourself absolutely insane. So unless something really, really stands out, and you go, okay, that was unusual, or a headline grabs your attention, or unless something, that really does interest you and you go, oh, I'd like to know more about that, then 9 times out of 10, just like any other human being, I'm not really taking any much notice of anybody, because it just drives you insane reading everything and everybody all the time. But to answer your question, yes, there has been a couple of times where I wished I'd have not known the truth. I'm not going to say any more than that.
So has a lie like ever changed the course of like a mission or even like your life that you might have uncovered or something like that?
So not so much missions wise as in change the course of it, but it's changed approach to it with regards to. So if you can imagine going to meet an asset at a hotel who you think is exclusively giving you information, and you meet that asset and you find out through whatever means necessary that they're also giving assets to an enemy country or another third party, then all of a sudden it changes the dynamic. So I have had things like that happen where you think, okay, they're not just bringing this to me, they're also selling it to, and again, I'm choosing my words carefully, another country or another entity or whatever. So then you go, okay, how do I utilize this to our benefit? How do I change this? So then you might turn around and say, okay, I now know you're giving information to somebody else. I'm going to change what you give them. I want you to, give me the information, and and so it's about changing the relationship with the asset, so that now they are, even though they're a double agent, you're capitalizing on it in a way that's going to assist, your best interests.
Now, how can you trust them to know that it's going to?
You can't. I mean, you can and you can't. To a degree, it's just down to judgment. If you've done your job properly, you've built a relationship with the person and you've done it well enough, then really it's a case of you've got a good idea that they will do what they say they do. But let's face it, look how many people are in the world who marry people who think they're their soulmate and then divorce them a few years later because they didn't really know them. If that's somebody you're married to and live with 24/7, 365 days a year, imagine an asset from a foreign country that you meet once a week or once a month that you have a very limited window with. Do you really know them? Not really. You're just going to have to use your best judgment. You do build a great and growing relationship with them. And I'd like to say the majority of the time, in my instances, it's always worked out favourable. 2 exceptions, 3, 2, 2.5, and that's about as much as I'll say with that. So we can only, like I said, we can only use our best judgment really when it comes down to it.
So speaking of then trust, what advice would you give to someone who wants to build more trust, and maybe someone that might struggle with being honest with themselves? I feel like especially we have a hard time looking at ourselves.
Yeah.
We have a hard time with being honest with who we are. And what advice do you have somebody to build that within themselves?
What I'd recommend here with everybody, if they want to improve their relationships with anybody at all, the first thing to do is improve their relationship with themselves, like you say, to look in the mirror and find a way to take the blame, to understand that you are a product of every decision that you've ever made in your life. Everything you've ever done, every bad decision you've ever made, every good decision you've ever made, and everything in between is what has made you who and what you are. So don't look back with regrets. Don't go back, oh, if I could go back in time, I'd change that and I wouldn't have done it. Understand that you learned from it and use it to the advantage of and then look at your weak points, identify them, shine the light on them, call them out, find areas where you're bad at a particular thing, and then say, right, I'm going to improve on that. And rather than saying the words like an affirmation, I'm very bad at X, turn around and say, right, I'm working on getting better at X. And it's just a mindset thing. Just shift it until you, at the same time, if somebody, and this is, for me, one of the biggest areas for so many people, I see it so many times, they would rather tell a small white lie to try and look better than actually look better by telling the truth. So if you break a vase and someone says, hey, did you break that? You turn around and say, yes, I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me sort it out. Let me get you another one. Let me see if I can get it repaired, whatever the case may be. Rather than turn around and go, no, I found it like that, which so many people do. And it doesn't matter what it is. And even more importantly, if you can call it out before anybody's accused you of it, go and approach the person whose plate you broke or whatever and turn around and say, look, I'm really sorry, I broke your plate. I've found by doing this, not only do most people, turn around and say, oh, it's no problem. And it actually is a lot better reaction than if you try and cover it up. But it shows a level of honesty that people then start to feel more comfortable with. And then that level of trust just grows exponentially, because if you're going to go to them with all the small stuff, every little thing, if they drop as little as a dime on the floor and you pick it up and say, hey, you dropped this, it shows that if you're going to go to the trouble to give them a dime, then you go to the trouble of being honest with them each and every time, rather than thinking, oh, that's sit there in my pocket, he hasn't noticed he dropped it. Make a point of kind of being as honest as you can in every situation, even if it means a little bit of self-deprecation.
It's funny because I remember working in a restaurant, and I remember this one moment in particular because it kind of like changed the way I like viewed people in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I stacked the cup wrong, and my manager, like, there's like 10 of us around, and my manager's, who did this? And I was like, oh, it's me. And her face was just like, why would anyone? It just read like she wasn't expecting anybody to admit it, right?
Mm.
She wasn't expecting that. And then, she was like, it gets stacked like this, whatever. And I was like, no problem. Now I know,
Yeah.
But it was just funny though, because I remember her face and it was like, and it was just funny too, because she was so aggressive when she said it,
Mm-hmm.
that she wasn't expecting any. I guess maybe she didn't even want to know, because then I think, because another thing too is sometimes you don't want to know, because then you have to like take some sort of action, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of, I was like, it's a freaking cup. I mean, like what is, but also I was in California and I drove my brother's car, and he has a Tesla and it drives itself. And yet I didn't trust this car driving itself. I was like, I'm going to drive the car. And I lost control for a hot second and I hit the curb and I damaged the rim. And I message him, like I call him and I'm like, I just damaged the rim. I will go take it to the place to repair and stuff. And like, for the next 12 hours, all I heard, he was like, don't even worry. He goes, I have 3 years on the car, we'll take care of it in 3 years. But all I heard for the next 12 hours was, how could you do that? The car drives itself. Why would you even drive it? How does one do that? All I heard, I heard it so much that I'm dreaming now about it. And I'm just like, oh my God. But it was just so funny too, because it's like, sometimes you feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's like, like being honest, you're just like, oh my God, is it worth it sometimes?
You can be, but what you've got to remember is short term, it might be a pain in the rear end, but long term, it helps to build that trust, because it's something that, yes, somebody might be annoyed if you've broken something of theirs, damaged something of theirs, or stained or done, that's to be expected. but at least that person knows that you've been honest with them, and long term down the line, when it's gone and forgotten about, when it comes down to another situation, if something goes missing or something's taken or whatever the case may be, and somebody asks you, did you do this? Did you take this? And you go, no, it wasn't me. Straight away, that person's going to default to believing you because you're an honest person at heart. And they know that, and the proof is in the pudding with that, because you've gone to them perhaps on more than one occasion and said, look, I did this, I'm sorry. And it's even better, like I say, if you do it before. If you did park your brother's car back up, and then he gets home and then he's calling you, did you damage my rim? And you go, yeah, well, that would have been like so much worse, because you wouldn't have heard the last of it for months.
Well, right now it's funny. There's like a scratch where the key goes. There's a scratch, and he noticed it, and he messages me, goes, who did this? And I go, no idea. I don't know. Like, I genuinely don't know. And he goes, well, you wear a watch, you wear a ring. And I go, if my watch or ring damaged the glass, how fragile is this glass? I was like, and I'm just like, hey, listen, if you want to blame me and it's me, just throw it on my bill in 3 years, like that's fine, but I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. But if it's going to shut you up, I guess in a way, like, sure, I'll go down that rabbit hole.
That reinforces exactly what I said about taking the blame. When I said to you about take the blame, even if something's not your fault, again, that shows honesty and integrity, where you can turn around and say, look, I don't believe I did it, but, at the end of the day, if you want to charge me for it, if it shuts you up, okay, crack on, don't worry, and I'll pay the bill. All right, it's not nice, but at least, again, it shows that level of integrity that, even if you don't believe it's you, bill me anyway, and that will build layers of trust with people being able to say, okay, no matter what, this person has my best interest at heart one way or another, and will definitely. And the best person actually in the world to talk about this, and it's a great guy, a friend of mine called Robin Dreek. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh, he was on the show. Yeah, he was on the show.
Brilliant,
Great
wonderful fella.
guy.
I mean, he wrote the book, The Code of Trust, and he definitely is the man when it comes to this kind of thing. So plug for you there, Robin. If you haven't got that book, then definitely buy it. He is just a wonderful guy all round in every way.
Yeah, he's fantastic. We didn't get a chance to actually talk about this real quick. I don't think we did. Did we talk about combined communication analysis yet?
No, so this is, again, it goes back to when I was saying about like kind of more than just body language. You're mixing in statement analysis, you're mixing in psychology, you're looking at blink rate, breath location, what's being said as well as the way it's being said, the tone, the pitch. So you're looking at this entire combination of like kind of non-verbal and verbal communication. And then mixing it all together. And this is one of the reasons I can be called into a court of law, whereas most others, if their only discipline is body language and that's it, it's not reliable enough, and they can't be called into a court of law. Whereas my areas of deception detection are enshrouded in this combined communication analysis, which is taking everything into account. It's more accurate that I can pick up on deception and therefore say, yes, I think the person is being untruthful or deceptive at this particular point, or no, I think the person is being perfectly honest and open about this particular situation. So
do you like study one part for a while and then add on the next part and add on the next part in order to be able to, do the whole? And then would you say, as you mentioned earlier in the show, that one studies body deception by studying themselves, how then can we add? Is that the way we add on everything? Because when we're listening and studying ourselves, we're doing every analysis, right? We're doing tone, we're doing all that stuff. So when you're doing somebody else, like how exactly, that's overload. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
That you gotta be really on.
So, I kind of talk about this in my book a little bit, and I say to people, body language and deception detection, it literally is a language. If you imagine somebody kind of reads a book, or, an English person reads a book on Spanish, and then they go to a Spanish restaurant to order food, and they get frustrated with themselves because they've forgotten everything they've read in the book and they're not fluent. It would be absolutely insane, right? If somebody turns around and says, I've read a book on body language, therefore I'm a deception detection expert. No, they're not. right? It doesn't work like that. So you have to become proficient in one particular area. So start with something. Just start with maybe blink rate and becoming aware of it. And all you've got to do is just count somebody's blink rate over 6 seconds, multiply it by 10, and then you get the answer. So over 6 seconds, if they blink once, then, it's 10 times per minute, or whatever the case may be. And if they blink 5 times, 50 times per minute, which is really, really high. Some people, when they're under extreme stress, it can be as much as 250 times a minute that a person will blink under extreme stress. So start with that, get proficient at it, get to the point where you're that good at it, it becomes almost, subconscious. Then go into the area of okay, now what I'm going to look for is insertion into the mouth. So, and this is something that people do. I'm sure you've seen, like when females pull their hair over their mouth and they bite it, or you get people who maybe chew on the end of a pen while they're thinking, or you get people who might put their fingers in their
fingernail.
mouth. Yeah, that kind of thing. Anything along those lines usually is a need for reassurance. I've got no science to back up this particular claim, but I think it's down to when we're infants and we're given a pacifier. Naturally, it's what kind of calms us and reassures us. So, and again, there's no science behind that. That's just my own conclusion of where the origins come from. So if you're talking to somebody, if you're a salesperson, you're talking to somebody about, a particular feature or a particular product, and they do that where they put the pen in their mouth or put their finger in their mouth or whatever else, that's a need for reassurance. So you need to address something that is that, you can say, I see you're not 100% sure about this particular feature. Let me run you through it and explain to you how it works. And again, get proficient at that and just build on one thing at a time. You can't become fluent in a language overnight. You need to learn to say hello first and then how are you, and and bit by bit build on it. And this is where, after enough time, just like anything, you can become multiple disciplined at being able to do it all at once. If you imagine when you first got into a car to drive and you're there and you're looking at the pedals to put your foot on the brake, and you're looking at the selector to put it into drive, and you're looking for where everything is, you're looking for where eventually you pull away, and then years later, you don't need to look for the brake pedal. Instinctively, you just know it's there. You don't need to look for the switches. You can just reach out and click them. You don't need to do any of that because you've become so proficient in doing all of this at once. You get people, they jump into the car, put their seatbelt on, start it up and drive away, and they're not thinking that, they're using the lights, they're using the bits of it, and they're doing it as they're going, multiple things at once, both hands, both legs, whatever, all working while their eyes are looking. And that's a bit like combined communication or body language. You get into the habit of being able to see in your peripheral vision. You don't need to be staring at someone's chest to see if their breath location has changed from belly to chest. You don't need to be staring into their eyes to count their blink rate. You just see it all naturally and even, like I say, subconsciously to a degree.
So for my final question for the show, for our listeners, what do you have for us that we can do on a daily basis to strengthen our mindset and be able to handle challenges that come our way?
Oh, I like that. That's a great question. I like your question. I think growth is the way forward in kind of every area. The person who thinks he knows everything is the most ignorant of all. I read every day. I'm constantly watching YouTube videos and looking and going, is that true? And challenging it and going to see and if there's evidence of it to support it or against it. And I think with everybody is not to get comfortable in learning a fact and going, okay, now I've learned about this, so therefore that's it, and I know everything about that area. Grow in a way where when it comes to mindset, there are so many things that are still not understood even by scientists. Even now, behavioral scientists all over the world can't even agree on what personality is. If the best of the best can't agree and don't know, then how does the average person? So keep that in mind with kind of, just because you've learned something doesn't mean it's there forever. Keep growing dynamically and moving on in ways that allows you to keep that momentum going.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show. You're absolutely fantastic.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member for extra goodies that only our Substack members get. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.